The diner smelled like scorched coffee and second chances nobody asked for. It was Tuesday morning, 8:12 a.m., and the truck stop off I-80 looked like it always did, half-lit neon, cracked vinyl booths, and that one flickering bulb above the pie display that no one bothered to fix. A place forgotten by the world, yet somehow still surviving. Just like Ellie Harper. She moved from table to table with the grace of someone used to being invisible. Her apron had a permanent stain from cherry syrup, her shoes had holes no one could see but her aching feet could feel. She smiled at truckers, refilled mugs without being asked, and said, "Have a good one," to people who wouldn't remember her name 10 minutes down the highway. But this morning was different. Booth 6 was empty. And Frank Delaney was never late. The old man had been coming every Tuesday and Friday for the past 3 months. Always sat by the window, ordered the same thing, black coffee, extra cream, side of rye toast. He spoke little. Tipped well. But it was his eyes that unsettled Ellie the most. Not cruel, not cold. Just distant. Like he was always watching something that wasn't there. That morning, Ellie poured a fresh pot, wiped down booth 6 twice and glanced at the clock again. 8:19. Nothing. She almost didn't notice the receipt until she was clearing off another table. Someone had folded it neatly and propped it against the sugar jar. And even though it wasn't her section, something made her reach for it. That was when she saw the message. And the tip. $200. On a $7.32 check. It wasn't the first time Frank had tipped more than the meal. But this was different. The handwriting was shaking more than usual. The ink bled slightly at the edges. And then those 5 words on the back. Don't forget who you are. Her breath caught in her throat again. This time she didn't cry. She couldn't. There was too much weight already hanging in her chest. Instead, she looked up, out the window where Frank used to sit, and beyond it, past the faded Shell sign and onto the endless stretch of highway. Just dust and wind and sky. Was this goodbye? Or something else? She tucked the receipt into her apron beside the other folded papers. The overdue electric bill, the foreclosure notice, the expired inhaler coupon. But the receipt, that one felt different. It didn't scream in red ink or threaten to take her home. It whispered. Like someone saw her. Like someone still believed there was more to her than a tired waitress with too many burdens and not enough time. She didn't know it yet, but that receipt was the first page of a story she never saw coming. A story about grief, forgiveness, and the kind of love that doesn't need blood to be real. And it all began with booth 6. The thing about pain is, it's quiet. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it folds neatly into the corner of an apron. Or hides in a voicemail no one dares to delete. Ellie Harper tucked the receipt deeper into her pocket as the day wore on. She moved like usual. Took orders. Cleared plates. Smiled at men who never looked her in the eyes. But inside, her stomach was a knot of static. Not just from the message Frank left, but from what waited at home. At the back of her closet, behind a row of shoes Mason had already outgrown, was a letter from the bank. Final notice. Foreclosure in 14 days. She hadn't told anyone. Not even her sister in Carson City, who had her own set of demons. Ellie was used to carrying it all. The bills. The inhalers. The growing shame. She kept everything in check until she couldn't. And it was getting close to that line. She ran a hand over her forehead, trying to remember if there was still peanut butter left in the pantry. Mason wouldn't complain. He never did. 6 years old and already learned how to read tension in her voice. Ellie turned to fill a coffee pot when her eyes drifted to booth 6 again. Still empty. What she didn't know, miles away, Frank Delaney sat alone in a rusted Chevy Caprice, parked at a cemetery just outside of Elko. The wind scraped dry leaves across the windshield as he stared at a single headstone. Lila Delaney. 1987 to 2015. Beloved daughter. Taken too soon. It had been 10 years. 10 birthdays. 10 apologies never spoken. Frank pulled his coat tighter, though the Nevada sun beat down hard. He played the same voicemail again, the last one Lila had left him. Dad, I'm sorry. I know you're mad. I just wanted you to meet her. Her name's Maddie. She's beautiful. You'd love her. Please, call me back. He never did. And then the crash came. A wet road. A too fast curve. No more calls. That silence became his punishment. He lived in it now. A man built of regret, drinking lukewarm coffee in a diner where no one asked questions. Until Ellie. She had the same fire in her jaw. The same stubborn quiet. He didn't know her story, not all of it. But he knew the weight when he saw it. He recognized the mask. Back at the diner, Ellie leaned against the counter just for a moment. She reached into her apron and pulled out the receipt again. The note. She read it once more like it might change meaning if she looked at it long enough. And across that dusty stretch of Nevada highway, two people sat, each clutching a secret they'd carried for far too long. Neither knew it yet. But their stories were about to collide. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand gesture. No movie moment confession. Just quiet things. Small kindnesses that slipped between the cracks of routine, barely noticeable unless you were the one who needed them. Frank returned the following Friday. No mention of the receipt. No mention of the tip. He simply nodded when Ellie poured his coffee, slid his rye toast to the side, and pulled out a newspaper so old the ink had yellowed. But when he left, another note sat folded neatly beside the creamer. Keep going. 2 words. That's all. But they held her together that day. The next visit, a $100 tip and a napkin scrawled with, "You're seen." By the 4th note, Ellie had started keeping a jar behind the coffee machine. A plain mason jar with masking tape on the front. In her messy handwriting it read, "New start." Half of every tip from Frank went in. No questions. No expectations. It wasn't about the money, though heaven knew she needed it. It was about the feeling. That maybe she wasn't invisible. That maybe someone out there thought she mattered enough to root for. She never asked Frank why he did it. He never explained. But little things started to shift. Her shoulders didn't droop as much at the end of each shift. She stayed an extra minute to wipe down booth 6 a little more carefully. Mason began asking why she smiled when she got home. A real smile, not the, "I'm okay baby" kind. And Frank, he started lingering. He asked about the music Ellie was humming one day, an old tune from her mother's radio. She asked what book he always carried under his coat. It was Steinbeck. Of course it was Steinbeck. Frank said he liked authors who wrote about hard lives without sugarcoating them. Ellie nodded. That makes 2 of us. No one else in the diner seemed to notice. Or care. To them, Frank was just an old man with too much time and Ellie was just the girl with tired eyes and a polite smile. But beneath the clatter of dishes and the hum of fluorescent lights, something was growing. A connection. Unspoken but steady. 2 people who'd lost parts of themselves, slowly recognizing the pieces in each other. One morning, Ellie came in early. Before sunrise. Before the cook had even unlocked the back door. She stood at booth 6, alone in the silence, and placed a small folded napkin where Frank usually sat. It simply read, "Thank you." She didn't know if he'd see it. Didn't know if he'd understand what those 2 words really meant. But deep down she hoped he would. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sinking alone. Ellie had always believed in surviving one day at a time. But this day broke her rhythm. It started with a letter taped to the front door of her apartment. Red ink, capital letters, "No kindness." Final notice, immediate vacate required. She stood frozen in the hallway, Mason tugging at her coat, asking if they were late for school. The paper flapped in the wind like it was mocking her. She took it down without reading it again. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. The rent had been overdue for 2 months. She tried. God, she tried. Worked doubles. Sold her TV. Ate toast for dinner. Every extra dollar had gone toward Mason's medication, and even that was running out. That morning he had woken up coughing. Not the normal kind. The kind of cough that curled tight in his chest and turned his small hands cold. She rummaged through drawers, praying the inhaler still had something left. 2 puffs. Barely enough. He clung to her legs afterward, his eyes wide and wet. "Mommy, am I gonna stop breathing?" She didn't answer. She just held him, rocking on the kitchen floor, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. That day Ellie didn't go to work. She couldn't. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was breaking. And even the strongest people have limits when they're trying to hold up a collapsing world with bare hands. Back at the diner, the clock struck 8:12. Booth 6 was full. Frank waited. He sipped his coffee, eyes drifting to the door every few minutes. No Ellie. Just the new girl, Cassie, barely 18, chewing gum behind the counter and calling everyone honey. Frank didn't touch his toast. He stayed longer than usual. When he finally stood to leave, he did something he'd never done before. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. His hand trembled as he wrote. Then he slid it under the salt shaker and walked out without a word. The next morning, Ellie returned to work, hair tied up hastily, dark circles under her eyes, holding herself together with coffee and threadbare willpower. Booth 6 was empty. But the napkin was still there. She unfolded it slowly, her hands shaking as if she already knew what she'd find. "Missed seeing your strength today." And just like that, Ellie broke. Right there in the middle of a half-empty diner, she covered her mouth and wept. Not because she felt weak, but because someone had finally noticed she was trying to be strong. The grave sat on the edge of a windswept hill. No flowers. Just gravel, dry grass, and a worn headstone that had long since faded in the Nevada sun. But Frank didn't need the name to be visible. He saw it every night when he closed his eyes. Lila Marie Delaney. Beloved daughter. She'd been gone 10 years. Still, he came back every August 4th. Brought the same things, a black and white photo from her 3rd birthday, a paper crane she made in 5th grade, and the voicemail he'd never deleted. He sat cross-legged on the dry earth, pulled out the flip phone and hit play again. Hey Dad. I know you probably won't answer, but I just wanted to tell you I'm okay. Her name's Maddie. She's got your eyes. Stubborn but sweet. I really wish you'd meet her. I miss you. Frank closed the phone with a shaky hand. He'd listened to that message more times than he could count. And yet, it still cracked something in his chest every single time. Because he hadn't called her back. Not after she told him she was pregnant at 19. Not after she begged for a second chance. Not even after she left town to raise her baby alone. He was too proud. Too angry. Too afraid of watching her ruin her life, like her mother always warned would happen. And by the time he was ready to apologize, it was too late. The accident took her on a rainy October morning. A 2-lane road slick with oil. No seatbelt. A truck with bad brakes. They said it was instant. But grief never is. Grief lingers. It builds a home in your chest and rearranges your furniture. It silences the world around you and leaves only the echo of what you should have said. That's why he started going to the diner. Not because he was hungry. Because he was haunted. And then he met Ellie. She had Lila's jawline. Her fire. Her way of pretending she was fine when she clearly wasn't. Frank didn't know her full story, but he didn't need to. He saw enough in her eyes to know she was drowning, quietly, stubbornly like Lila did. And this time, he couldn't look away. He started leaving tips. Notes. Little things. Not out of pity. But out of something deeper. Redemption. Maybe he couldn't save Lila. But maybe, just maybe, helping Ellie could be a way to finally speak the words he never had the courage to say. He stood up from the grave, knees cracking under his old frame, and looked up at the pale blue sky. I see her now, Lee, he whispered. I won't mess this one up. And for the first time in a decade, the wind didn't feel quite so cold. Hospitals are cold even in August. Frank sat on the edge of the exam table, paper crinkling beneath him, hands clenched in his lap. The doctor was talking, using words like progressed, metastasized, and maybe 5 weeks if we're lucky. But all Frank heard was the ticking of the wall clock. Steady. Relentless. He didn't ask questions. Didn't rage or cry. He just nodded, buttoned his flannel shirt with slow, deliberate hands, and walked out into the afternoon sun like nothing had changed. Except everything had. He drove in silence. No radio. No voicemail playback. Just the hum of the old engine and a sharp awareness of each breath. Each mile. Each heartbeat. At a stoplight, he looked in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired. Older than 72. Hollowed out. But there was something else behind his eyes. Clarity. He knew what he had to do. Frank didn't want to die with regret still rotting in his chest. He had failed Lila. Failed her as a father. Failed her as a man who was supposed to protect, to forgive. But Ellie was still here. Still fighting. Still standing on the edge of a cliff, holding Mason in one arm and her dreams in the other. And she was slipping. Frank couldn't give her a miracle. But maybe he could give her a chance. He pulled into the bank just before closing. The manager knew him, small-town courtesy. They exchanged tight smiles and a firm handshake. Frank emptied most of his savings. Drafted a cashier's check for $50,000. The manager raised an eyebrow. Big move, Frank. You finally taking that road trip? Frank chuckled dry and low. Something like that. He went home and sat at his kitchen table. The same one he once refused to let Lila eat at when she told him she was keeping the baby. The silence in the house was loud. He didn't turn on the lights. Just pulled out a pen. And wrote. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. He simply told the truth. I didn't get to save my daughter. But I hope this helps me find my way back to her. If you're reading this, it means I saw something in you worth saving. And I believe you can break the cycle. He signed it. Folded it. Tucked it inside the envelope with the check. Then in careful script, he wrote Ellie's name on the outside. The next morning he walked into the diner one last time. Ordered black coffee, extra cream. Toast like always. But this time when he left booth 6, he left behind more than a tip. He left behind everything. Narration: Nip kutsang ne um nu mot gay truak kanjong lan. Ellie came in late that morning, hair still damp from a cold shower and Mason's cereal half-eaten on the kitchen table. She was exhausted but determined, because booth 6 might be full again. And somehow that mattered. But when she walked in, Frank wasn't there. Not at 8:15. Not by 9 o'clock. Not even at noon. No call. No note. No tip. Just absence. She checked the parking lot twice. Checked her phone even though he'd never asked for her number. Asked Cassie, the new girl, if he'd shown up earlier. Oh yeah, Cassie said, chewing gum. He was in and out fast. Left an envelope, I think. But it's gone now. Gone? Ellie blinked. Where'd you put it? Cassie shrugged. I left it on the counter. Thought it was one of those surveys. You know, the ones with coupons or whatever. Panic tightened in Ellie's chest. She searched everywhere. Under the register. Behind the coffee pots. In the trash. Nothing. Just crumpled napkins, receipts, and half-eaten hash browns. By the end of her shift, her hands smelled like bleach and desperation. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Mason snored softly beside her. She kept playing the same question in her mind. Why did he disappear? Did she imagine everything? The notes? The kindness? The promise in his eyes? Her heart didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, like a dam with just enough water pressing behind it. And by Friday it burst. She didn't wipe down booth 6. Didn't pour the coffee Frank never came to drink. She moved like a shadow of herself, polite but distant, present but not really there. That afternoon, the dishwasher cornered her in the back hallway. Louis, barely 20. Always quiet. Always stayed late. He held something in his hand, an envelope slightly torn at the corner but still sealed. His eyes were rimmed with red, and his voice trembled when he spoke. I took it. I thought it was just a gift card or something. I swear I didn't know. I didn't even open it. I'm so sorry. Ellie stared at the envelope like it might catch fire in her hands. She opened it slowly. Inside, a check. $50,000. And a letter, handwritten. Her vision blurred as she read Frank's words. I didn't get to save Lila. But I hope helping you helps me get home to her. Her knees buckled. Tears came fast and hot, falling onto the letter as her breath caught in her throat. The shame, the anger, the sorrow, all of it twisted inside her. He hadn't abandoned her. He trusted her. And now she was almost too late. The letter shook in her hands. Not from the wind, the hallway was still, but from something deeper. A tremor born of regret and love, and the cruel realization that she had almost missed it all. Frank hadn't left her. He had chosen her. He had taken whatever time he had left, whatever guilt remained, and turned it into something Ellie hadn't felt in years. Belief. She clutched the envelope to her chest and ran. Out the back door. Past the kitchen. Into the Nevada dusk, where the sun was bleeding into the desert like a slow apology. Cassie called after her. Luis tried to explain. But Ellie wasn't listening. She drove. With no music. No headlights. Just instinct. There was only one hospital nearby, Elko County General. If Frank was still alive, he'd be there. And if he wasn't? She didn't let herself finish that thought. Her mind was racing, flashes of the napkins, the tips, the way Frank's eyes lingered on Mason when she showed him a photo once. How he smiled like it hurt. Like he was seeing something lost, and something found, all at once. The car screeched into the parking lot. She barely remembered how she got out, how she passed the front desk, how the nurse looked at her like she wasn't supposed to be there. I need to see him, she gasped. Frank Delaney. Please. The nurse hesitated. Are you family? Ellie looked down at the letter. At the envelope with her name in his handwriting. She nodded. Yes, I am. They led her down a quiet hallway with soft lights and linoleum that squeaked under her sneakers. The air smelled like antiseptic and something heavier, like a waiting room before a storm. Room 214. She pushed the door open slowly. And there he was. Frank lay in the bed, eyes half closed, breath shallow, a tangle of tubes around his arms. He looked smaller than before, like the weight of everything he carried had finally pressed him into the mattress. But when she whispered his name, Frank, his eyes fluttered open. Slowly they focused. A tired smile broke across his cracked lips. Told you you'd figure it out. Ellie bit back a sob and sat beside him, clutching his hand, the same hand that had written those notes. Left those tips. built a bridge between two broken people with nothing more than kindness. "Why me?" she whispered. He looked at her. Really looked. "Because you're still fighting. And I needed to believe someone still could." A knock at the door. Mason peeked in, holding something small in his hand. A plastic toy train. He walked up shyly, placed it in Frank's lap, and said, "Thank you for being my grandpa, even just today." Frank's eyes filled with tears. His fingers curled around the toy. And in that moment, something inside him softened, like a thread finally unknotted. "Tell Lila," he whispered, "I did one thing right." The hospital room was quiet, except for the beeping, steady, soft, inevitable. Frank lay propped up slightly, the toy train still clutched in his hand like a final promise. His fingers, once calloused from decades on the railroad, now trembled with fragility. But in his eyes something had changed. Not fear. Not regret. Ellie sat beside him, holding his other hand. She didn't speak. Words felt too heavy now, too small for what was happening. Her thumb moved gently over his wrist, as if trying to keep time with his fading pulse. On the other side of the bed, Mason leaned forward, his chin barely reaching the mattress. "You like trains?" he asked softly. Frank gave the faintest nod. "Used to drive them, long ago." Mason's eyes widened. "Cool. I have a rocket train at home. It goes really fast." Frank smiled, not the kind that stretches lips but the kind that warms bone. "Maybe you can launch it, for me?" Ellie swallowed hard. "We will," she whispered. "We'll launch it straight to the stars." Frank turned to her then. His voice was a rasp but his gaze was steady. "You're stronger than you think, Ellie. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." Tears welled in her eyes but she held them back. She wanted him to see her the way he always had, not as someone broken but as someone rising. Mason crawled up beside her, placing one small hand over Frank's. "Are you going away?" Frank looked at him for a long moment. "Just catching one last train, buddy?" His breathing slowed. The beeping turned irregular. Ellie leaned close. "Frank, if you see her, if you see Lila." He smiled again, barely there but enough. "Tell her I finally got it right." And then, with Mason's toy train resting against his chest, and the late afternoon sun filtering through the window like a soft farewell, Frank Delaney took his final breath. No alarms. No panic. Just a man quietly stepping onto the train he'd been waiting for all his life. Scene transition, Vi Gay Sao, Boutroy dem Nevada, Ellie va Mason Tren Gondoi no. Mason held the toy rocket in both hands. "Ready, mommy?" Ellie nodded, blinking up at the stars. "Go ahead, baby. He's watching." The rocket launched, hissing through the sky in a streak of silver and fire. It arced high, then vanished into the night. Mason waved. "Bye, Grandpa Frank." Ellie smiled through tears. She didn't say goodbye. She said thank you. 3 months later, the truck stop looked the same from the outside. Same faded signs, same dusty windows, same tired jukebox that still wouldn't play. But if you parked near the far end of the lot, past the gas pumps and cracked concrete, you'd see something new. A food truck. Slick, white, lined with hand-painted wildflowers across its side. And above the service window, in bold red letters, "Lila's Table." Ellie stood inside, apron wrapped neatly around her waist, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that Mason insisted made her look like a real chef. She handed out coffee with a smile that no longer needed to be forced, and grilled sandwiches named after memories. The Delaney Melt. Mason's mini stack. Frank's Rye Revival. There was a framed photo just above the tip jar, not of Ellie but of Booth 6, empty but glowing in the morning sun. Next to it, a small plaque that read, "Where strangers become family." People came from miles around. Not for the food, though Ellie had learned a few tricks from an old cook in Reno, but for the warmth, the welcome, the quiet dignity she brought to everyone who stepped up to her window. Single moms came too. Some with babies on their hips. Some with suitcases in their trunks. Some with bruises you couldn't see. Ellie saw them. She always saw them. And each time she handed over more than food. She offered envelopes. No fanfare. Just quiet assistance from a fund she called Frank's Jar. She never spoke about the man behind it, but if they asked, she'd say, it started with a note on a receipt, and ended with everything changing. At night, after the truck closed and Mason had fallen asleep in the fold-out cot tucked behind the counter, Ellie would sit on the roof, staring at the stars. Sometimes she talked to them. Sometimes she just listened. One night, as a breeze rustled through the dry Nevada grass, she whispered, "I'm still fighting, Frank. Like you told me." And for a moment, In the hush of that vast sky, she swore she heard the distant hum of a train rolling steady through the dark. Sometimes the person you save isn't the one who receives your kindness. It's the one who gives it. And in saving each other, we remember who we are.